All right, everybody, you guys are joining. Unfortunately, my camera on this computer is very finicky and it's choosing not to participate. So you don't get a chance to see me. But let me go to screen share, and that should work. All right. Now, for all you folks that are on Zoom tonight, may I encourage you to join us next month, because we're going to have a whole bunch of live falconry folks here, as well as raptors. So could have a peregrine falcon, probably a couple of red tail hawks, red shoulder hawks, that kind of thing. So that should fill the room. It's lovely seeing more faces here as we're getting back to in-person meetings. All right, let's see if we've got. All right, we're going to go ahead and get started. So welcome, everybody. Welcome here in person, as well as you folks online. And my name is Dan Jacobowitz. I'm the president of HAWK, the Habitat and Wildlife Keepers, which is the North Carolina Wildlife Federation's very first chapter about 17 years ago. And since then, we now have roughly 20 chapters around the state and a number of affiliates as well. So that is fantastic. And it's not advancing my slide. There we go. All right. And for those of you that don't know HAWK, we're, of course, here in the Matthews, North Carolina area. In essence, we help folks understand the connection between nature and all of us, whether that be a spider, a snake, the organisms living in the soil, as well as just general environmental practices. Squirrel Lake Park is where we got started with the chapter, and this is a garden. We should get an updated picture because this has grown tremendously since then, and a whole lot more volunteer gardening effort needed to keep it looking pretty like this. And so we certainly are always looking for volunteers. I'll get to that in a moment. But one of the big things that North Carolina Wildlife Federation does, and it's part of the National Wildlife Federation for many years, is having folks certify their backyards and front yards as wildlife habitats. And it's really pretty simple, food, water, cover, places to raise young, and one last little bit, which is being very gentle with chemicals, herbicides, fungicides, insecticides, that kind of thing. Leaving leaf layer on the ground, good sustainable gardening practices. But you can certify your backyard, front yard. If you're not familiar with it, go to nwf.org and take a look. It's certainly something that's relatively easy, and it's a great way to get a chance to teach your neighbors to do the right thing as well. I mentioned volunteers. We have a Kids in Nature Day in October, and then we have coming up in April, Earth Day with Kids in Nature Day. And we're always looking for folks to help out, teach kids how to go fishing. I know a lot of folks here in the room that are live volunteer, whether it's with USA, whether it's with our other groups and helping folks at the various booths and exhibitors that we have. So come join us that way. Be part of our leadership team. Bring cookies and that kind of thing. Now that we're starting to meet in person again, we're going to start our raffles again. And so come on and help us out. We've always used either a little bit of help or a whole lot of help. Just depends on what you're willing to offer us. Earth Day, I mentioned, is coming up April the 15th over at Squirrel Lake Park. If you're familiar with that event, it is fantastic. We'll have all sorts of nonprofits like Catawba Riverkeeper, Audubon, Tree Charlotte, Sustain Charlotte, and a whole lot of fun activities for the kids, adults alike, building birdhouses. We've got native bee houses that we're going to be doing this year. So that's going to be kind of a neat one that we look forward to teach folks how to take care of native bees, which are solitary bees. If you didn't see our presentation a couple of months ago on solitary bees, go check out our YouTube channel. It will be on there. There's a great presentation by Dave Hunter. Always want to thank our sponsors, and we're always looking for more sponsors. Williams Subaru has sponsored our Earth Day event for the last 6 years running, and we're delighted to have them again. Birdhouse on the Greenway has been a longtime sponsor of ours, and want to thank them. If you're local, go see them. Next month, I alluded to this, we've got the North Carolina Falconry folks coming. Aaron Kincaid is the president of the Falconry Guild, and he'll be bringing at least 1 or 2 birds. You might have seen him last year at our Earth Day event. And a couple of his folks are going to be bringing their birds as well. So I'm glad that we don't have any carpeting in here, because we don't have to lay down a tarp. You know, meat eaters, they go when they want to go. Easy cleanup. Tonight, we have got a special guest, Drew Gay from the NC Division of Water Resources. He is an aquatic plant specialist. And so Drew is an environmental specialist with NC Division of Water Resources Aquatic Weed Control Program. He's worked there since 2014. It's a state-funded grant program that assists local governments, public utilities, and other entities with invasive aquatic vegetation management. He graduated from NC State in 2014 with a BS in Fisheries, Wildlife, and Conservation Biology. He's active in a number of professional and conservation societies, including the North Carolina Aquatic Weed Control Council and the North Carolina Invasive Plant Council, which is where I know Drew from. So he's going to chat with us about both aquatic as well as terrestrial invasive plants. So Drew, take it away. I'm going to go ahead and let you share your screen and unmute yourself.
All right, can everybody hear me all right?
Yeah, got you good. All right. Let's go ahead and get your screen shared, and then I'll let you take it away. So we do have a Q&A, so go ahead and for everybody on Zoom, go ahead and click the Q&A button and ask questions. And at the end of the presentation, we'll go ahead and we'll pepper Drew with as many questions as he can tolerate tonight. All right, it's all you, Drew. We got your screen up, looking good.
All right, perfect. Well, yeah, thanks, Dan, for having me and allowing me to come talk to you guys about invasive plants in North Carolina. I will say that as Dan said, my background really is in the aquatics. That's what I've been doing for about the last 10 years. But I've been with the Invasive Plant Council for about 4 years now. So I've picked up quite a bit of the, terrestrial management and what plants are out there. And so I'm going to do my best to, to go through all the terrestrial stuff. And if there are any questions and I'm not able to answer them, I'll be able to, we can get those questions written down, and then I can ask some of our board members, any specific questions that I'm not able to answer. So, all right, well, kind of the reason that I'm here is I'm on the North Carolina Invasive Plant Council. It was a nonprofit group established in 2002. We have a pretty wide range of membership: land conservationists, consultants, researchers, a couple of people from the plant nursery industry, the botanical gardens, and even a few concerned citizens. And so basically what we wanted to be, what the council was kind of set up to be, was kind of a communication hub and more of the education and outreach side of things, more so than actually getting into going out and doing any invasive plant removal, things like that. We do that some, and then pretty much everybody on the council is in some way, their day job is something to do with invasive plants. So we'll kind of get through the boring stuff first. I know Dan wanted me to touch on the kind of just the laws and regulations concerning noxious weeds. So in North Carolina, the NC Department of Ag and Consumer Services is the regulatory agency. So basically kind of what gives them their power is the plant pest law. So that kind of defines what a plant pest is, and then grants the Board of Agriculture authority to adopt regulations. And then they can inspect vehicles and nurseries for plant pests. And then also requires any nurseries to have a license if they're selling plants, and then outlines the criminal penalties for violations. I will say they're very averse to really writing any fines, so that they don't really do that much. And one thing that I think is really good that they do is doing these nursery inspections. They have a few. I'm not exactly sure the number of staff that they have. It's probably not enough, but they do go around and at least check all the nurseries in the state once a year. And so there was one plant called giant salvinia. It's an aquatic fern, and I'll touch on that plant a little bit later, but wanted to mention it here. The first time we had it in the state, it was traced back to a contaminated water garden plant that somebody bought and put out in their pond. And so we were able to basically go back, going through these nursery inspections, we were able to, they remember what nursery they bought it from, and we were able to go back through and really get there and stop that, that plant from being sold until we could get rid of the salvinia. And then a more recent find was sessile joyweed, which is a federal noxious weed. And that was found, I believe, in November of this year as a greenhouse contaminant during one of the inspections. They don't have any reason to believe now that it's out in the environment, but that's definitely going to be on their radar to just be on the lookout for that plant and make sure that it hasn't escaped. So the Department of Ag, then they maintain the list of noxious weeds, which are, and they separate that into 3 classes. So there's Class A, which is all the federal noxious weeds, which are listed by the U.S. Department of Ag. And then it does have a few other ones on there that aren't on the federal noxious weed list. And basically with those, you can't sell them, you can't move them into or within North Carolina. And then Class B is some other plants that are not on the federal list, but are particularly invasive here in North Carolina. And movement, they basically have quarantine areas set up, and you can move it. Usually they're just counties. So you can move it within the county, but you're not allowed to move it outside of the county without a permit. And you cannot sell them. And then Class C, there's only one plant, Oriental bittersweet, which is, kind of everybody knows that that's a pretty invasive plant, but it is used in the western part of the state to make like Christmas wreaths and other things, other kind of Christmas time decorations. So basically they set it up where pretty much the whole mountains are the quarantine area, and you're not allowed to move it out. So it's similar to the Class B in that sense, but you are able to sell it in the mountain region. And then moving on kind of just to the aquatic side, which is where the program that I'm in, the Aquatic Weed Control Program. It was developed in the 1980s to address hydrilla, which is a federally listed noxious weed. And an interagency task force recommended that a state program be created to provide assistance to the local governments who are going to be burdened by aquatic weed infestations. Then the Aquatic Weed Control Act of 1991, that kind of gives that's what gives the weed program its teeth, basically. Kind of outlines what we can and can't do. We can control, eradicate, and noxious aquatic weeds, preserve human health, safety, things like that. And then we're also able to add species to our list, which is it's a little bit different than what the Department of Ag, their noxious weed list. And I'll go over that a little bit later on in the presentation. And then just wanted to touch on herbicide use. Again, the Department of Ag is the regulatory agency. Not sure if you've heard, but FIFRA is basically the federal statute that requires any pesticides to be registered with the EPA. And then there's the NC Pesticide Law of 1971, which requires any pesticide product to be registered in North Carolina, and then your licensing requirements. So basically anybody who's getting paid to apply an herbicide or a pesticide has to have a license. And then just kind of outlines the proper handling, transportation, that kind of thing. And then just wanted to mention that the label is the law. So anytime you're out spraying, even if you're just out spraying something that you bought from Home Depot, you cannot use that product unless it explicitly says it on the label. If you use it in a manner, or somewhere where you're not supposed to, where it's not explicitly on the label, then you are breaking the law. Like for example, with Roundup, you are not allowed, that's not labeled for aquatic use site, so you wouldn't be able to spray floating plant or anything in water. You would not be allowed to spray Roundup. So moving on to just some definitions, so we all kind of are on the same page. I know there's a lot of different names for these invasive species: alien, noxious, exotic. So we'll just kind of go through just kind of make sure we're all on the same page. And so there's an executive order which kind of outline what the definitions are. So native, it's basically a species that has historically occurred in a certain ecosystem. An exotic species would be one that is not in its current, or is not in its historical range, but it's not causing any issues, or not capable of propagating
anymore, or you're not. Now you're back.
Oh,
so you dropped right when you were going into noxious.
So did you hear native?
No, you said a couple of different. Well, yeah, you got right to this slide, and this is where we dropped you.
Okay, all right. So native, basically just plant that's in its historical range, and it's basically in the ecosystem that it's supposed to be. An exotic is one that's outside of its historical range, but is not causing any issues, and not able to propagate. And then an invasive exotic would be one that its introduction into it's outside of its native range is likely to cause or is causing economic, environmental, or harm to human health. So that just wanted to kind of get through those definitions just to kind of make sure everybody's on the same page. And I might use some terms interchangeably, like I said, with noxious. Noxious is kind of more of a it's more of an economic term, and one that would be one, like I was saying, with our the regulatory side of things. That's where noxious comes in. So some characteristics of invasives: they have a really fast growth rate. The Salvinia that I was mentioning earlier, it's a floating fern, and it's able to double its biomass in about 10 days. So it's a very fast, grows very fast, and can really just take over a pond or a cove of a lake very quickly. Had seeds that germinate quickly, and they make a lot of seeds, and they're easily dispersed. They're able to reproduce, by seed as well as vegetatively. They have longer flower and fruiting periods than some of our native species. They're adaptable to a wide range of soil and growing conditions. For instance, Elaeagnus or your Russian olive, autumn olive, those are actually have nitrogen or have nodules that are able to fix nitrogen, so they're able to survive in some more adverse conditions than our native species. And one of the biggest ones in my mind is there's no major pest or disease problems because they just, in the range that they're in now, they just don't, there wasn't able to evolve with them, throughout their history. And then how did they get here? A majority of them were brought through the ornamental trade because they either had a really nice flower or, they were, kind of go back to those characteristics of them. They, can grow fast. They, have, longer, they're gonna have their flower for longer, their fruit for longer, than some of our native species. And then some of them were hitchhikers and ballast water, packing material. So that would be more of the accidental introductions. And then here's just a few issues that they cause. This is definitely not a complete list. They crowd out native species, can create monocultures. I'm sure everybody's seen, especially down in the Charlotte area, there's, with all the privet down there, you can just look in the understory of a forest and you can't even see through it. They alter soil characteristics and then fire intensity and frequency. They interfere with the natural succession of our forest, and they can also displace rare plant species. So once they're here, how do they spread? And probably this is porcelain berry. And as you can see by the picture, you can probably guess kind of where I'm going with this, but it's really the birds that are probably moving these species the most, because they go and eat the berries, and then we can't, unfortunately, tell them to not go into our, come into our lawn and eat a berry from a non-native plant and then fly into the forest and poop that berry out with the seed. Unfortunately, we can't tell them not to do that. So if you just, I just did a quick Google search, and you can see there's, how many articles and just web pages there are about birds and invasive plant dispersal. And then just a few more pictures with some of the, these berries on there that are so attractive to birds. There's a cedar waxwing up there in the top right. So can you guys see that on my screen? This up here at the top. This where it looks like it's from Zoom. I don't know if you guys can see that or not. It seems like it's in the way of my presentation.
On the upper right, the cedar waxwing?
Yeah, but can you see like a black bar up on the top?
No.
Okay, all right. I just noticed that was on my screen, and I didn't know if it was something that only I was seeing. So that's what it is. So we'll forget that I mentioned it.
Okay.
Now I can't move forward. Okay, so this is so Johnny Randall, who's also on our board, was actually going to give this terrestrial part of the presentation, but unfortunately he had a conflict. So he shared some slides with me, and I saw this one, and I knew that I had to include it somehow. It's I'm sure everybody's seen this, seen that, a different iteration of this, but it's basically saying, just talking about the birds and, a plant that you don't think is invasive, that you're not seeing is invasive because it's not spreading in your yard, but it could be in that, patch of woods you have, a few hundred feet from your house or something. It could be just tons of these plants in there because you're just never going to see them. And then just a few other ways that invasives are spread, planting of garden ornamentals that people are unfamiliar with. I don't think the second one, the animals and insects, that it introduces biocontrol, I don't think that's as big of an issue now. I think there's pretty rigorous, before you can even get a biocontrol, there has to be tons of research and, just so much time has to be, you really have to show that whatever, if you're targeting a certain plant, that this bug or whatever you're going to be, targeting, it really is that bug will only eat this tree and not have any effect on anything else. And then, just unintentional spread through contaminated nursery stocks, on vehicles and equipment. A lot of stuff gets transported on, pine straw or firewood. It's usually more of the insects kind of with the firewood, like the spotted and lanternfly. And then this was another picture from Johnny's presentation that he sent me. It's, there's just people are, it's an invasive plant, but they're not getting any complaints from their neighbors, but it's because their neighbor is, being smothered by this invasive plant that they have that's not causing them any issues. And so moving on, we have the Invasive Plant Council. We basically put together what we call the shun list, which is, basically just, kind of our list of top, invasive plants that are still sold, within North Carolina, and basically just tell them, this is just the plants that we don't want people to purchase, and the plants that we want to, people to tell their neighbors and, their neighbors and all that to not purchase these, so that we can start working from the consumer part instead of the government coming in and saying, you're not going to be able to sell mimosa anymore, coming from the consumers to stop asking for mimosa, and then having the growers and the nurseries saying, well, this plant isn't this plant isn't selling, so we're not gonna continue to keep it in our stock. And this is available on our website. If you guys want to go and look at it, download it. There's I think about 40 species on there, I think, something like that. And then we'll move on to just a few of the invasive plants that we have here in the state. The first one everybody knows, Bradford pear or calorie pear. It's native to China and Taiwan. The seeds were brought over as an experiment to see if they were more resistant to fire blight than the common fruiting pears that we had. I believe that was in maybe the 1920s or 1930s, somewhere in that time range. And the experiments were unsuccessful. So then they basically just said, well, we're just going to start, they were going to try to hybridize with these with the native pear that we have. But those experiments were unsuccessful, and basically they just started growing this Bradford pear. So the Bradford pear is the one that you see that people are planting, and it's thornless and it can grow pretty tall, narrow, glossy, dark leaves. And there's that picture with the flowers. You see those, every spring it flowers before everything else, and has a really bad smell. To me, it smells like rotting fish. And then everybody knows the structural weaknesses has made it over the years less popular as ornamental. Every time we have an ice storm come through or high winds, these always seem to be the first trees to break. And starting in 2024, South Carolina is actually going to ban the sale. I think they passed the law last year, but they wanted to give the nurseries time to sell, the rest of their stock, and just kind of gear up for not being able to sell it anymore. And North Carolina, we now have a Bradford pear bounty. It's through NC State. So basically, they have a few times a year, you just come and show that you cut down a Bradford pear in your yard, and then they will give you a native tree for free to replace it with. I think at the end of the presentation, I have the website, where you can go get some more information on that. Another pretty common one is Chinese wisteria. As you can imagine, with this nice purple flower, it was introduced as ornamental. Basically, it's a vine, and it girdles, strangles, and kills, any trees and shrubs that it grows up. And then it gets these seed pods. That's another good way to identify it. And they're about 4 to 6 inches long. And there is a native wisteria, but you won't really see that one climbing, and it's nowhere near as aggressive. The seed pod is also smooth, whereas the Chinese wisteria, that seed pod is velvety. So that's another good way to distinguish between the two. Tree of Heaven. That's another one that I see all the time when I'm driving down the interstate or anything. It really likes these disturbed areas, and I think it was even probably planted in those areas as well. Small to medium size, smooth gray bark, alternate compound leaves. And if you go up to it and you break like a stem off or one of the branches off, it actually, to me, it kind of smells like, almost smells like burnt peanut butter. So that's kind of one good way to identify it. And the seeds are really light, and they spread super easily through the wind, and they're able to tolerate poor soil conditions. And also, they are the preferred host for the spotted lanternfly, which up until recently was kind of an issue up in the northeast part of the country. It is now been found I think sometime last summer or early summer, it was found in somewhere outside of Winston-Salem, Louisville, I think, somewhere around there. And so the Department of Ag, they set out and they started, really doing quite a bit of work to try to map out where there was where there was spotted lanternfly and where there was tree of heaven. They were kind of targeting these areas with significant tree of heaven. Kind of their first spots that they would go and look, and then they started, expanding their search out more as they, as they got through and, started, just expanding their search. Once they kind of got the local area right within like a mile radius, I think, or something, then they started expanding it out to a few miles. Mimosa, another one that was still a popular ornamental tree, was introduced in the 1700s. The trees, they produce shoots from their root sprouts, which allows them to form really dense thickets anywhere that they're planted. And seeds are really light and, almost kind of feather-like. So they're very easily dispersed by animals through water and even in the wind. Grows best in full sun, so you see it a lot of times along roadways and streams. Can grow pretty tall, up to 50 feet tall. And then you can see the flowers. That's pretty much the easiest way to identify it. And then it gets these seed pods in the fall. Another one, leatherleaf mahonia. It's a large evergreen shrub. Kind of looks a little bit similar to a holly, but the leaf shape is a little bit different. Native to Western China. It's an ornamental plant again. It can grow up to 10 feet tall, but it's typically just about waist high. And it's got pinnate compound leaves. They have a purplish leaf stalk, and then flowers in January to April. And then it gets these waxy green fruits after that. And then they mature in the late spring to early summer to this blue and this down here kind of egg shaped and kind of densely packed on there, like similar to grapes. And it's very attractive to birds, so that it's easily spread. That's one of the ways that it's spread is with birds eating the berries and then depositing those in other places. Japanese barberry, another ornamental introduced in the 1800s. It's pretty small, 3 to 6 feet tall. Smooth edges on the leaves. They're alternately arranged along the branches. Small flowers in May, and then it gets gets red oblong fruits like this picture up here in the upper right. So another one that's very attractive to birds. So that's really the main way that this one is spread. And it makes a lot of seeds. It's got very good seed viability. It's got sexual reproduction, vegetative reproduction, and it's very shade tolerant. And it's not invades a variety of habitats. Butterfly bush. This is kind of one I just wanted to put on there. Everybody thinks butterfly bush. It's got to be native because we have butterflies, and it's got to be good for butterflies. But actually, it's an invasive one. It's native to China. One reason is it's brought over is it grows fast and it's drought tolerant. And while it is attractive to butterflies and other pollinators, butterfly larvae are not able to survive on it. So it would be better to have our, milkweeds, which is what our native butterflies actually evolved with, and the larvae are able to survive on milkweed. Russian olive. This is another one. It was planted as an ornamental, native to Europe and Western Asia. And it was promoted actually up until maybe 20 or so years ago, 25 years ago, by the USDA Natural Resource Conservation Service for wildlife planting and then windbreaks. But they are not recommending that plant anymore, which is really good. It's often planted on rights of ways because it's drought and salt tolerant, and like I mentioned before, has the nodules that are able to fix nitrogen, so it can survive in very adverse environmental conditions that our native plants are not able to. It grows rapidly and resprouts quickly after cutting or burning. And then it's often confused with the autumn olive, which we'll talk about next. Kind of this little bit of a overlap on their ranges. Same thing. It was promoted by the USDA Natural Resource Conservation Service. It's got the same nitrogen fixing root nodules. So another one that we see quite often in rights of ways, and as it's sort of a green barrier between for privacy, things like that, or windbreak. And then one of our other olives is the thorny olive. It was introduced as ornamental again. Grows very dense. The foliage is evergreen. It's waxy, and it gets these berries right here, so it's really attractive to birds. Wide range of, just like the other two, wide range of soil types, and tolerates a wide range of soil types, and is highly salt tolerant. And then it's not a vine, but it kind of acts like one. The young branchlets can they basically have thorns on there that can kind of hook onto other plants and actually start climbing up other trees, walls, retaining walls, things like that. Next, Chinese privet. It's another ornamental that was introduced from Asia, variety of habitats. It really likes bottomlands and along streams. And it can form very dense thickets, which basically nothing else is able to grow in there. At my old house, we had about 7/10 of an acre, and the previous owner did a good job of kind of keeping up with the yard, but then as he got older, he wasn't able to anymore. And so basically probably about a third of the yard that wasn't managed for turf basically just turned into a thicket of privet. And it took me about a year, but I was able to finally remove all of it. But some of the trees that were in there, they were almost, the trunks were almost as big as my thigh. So basically it was just going in there and cutting those, and then every time we have resprouts going up and either pulling them or spraying them. It's these white flowers at the end of each branch in the spring. And Japanese privet, it's pretty similar to Chinese privet. Gets these white flowers similar to the Chinese privet. A little more widely dispersed throughout the southeast, and then it's most common kind of in moist forests, kind of the bottomlands. It likes a little bit wetter soil than the Chinese privet. Sacred bamboo or nandina. This is one that I see all the time in people's yards, because it's an evergreen, and it gets these nice berries, just can tolerate a wide range of soil types and shade tolerant. And this one, actually, they've seen cedar waxwings. I think it was down in Georgia. They basically found this big, thicket of nandina, and basically kind of gorged themselves on all these berries, and then they started dying. And they figured out that there's actually cyanide inside the berries, and they could eat one or two and be fine, but their bellies were just totally full of these these nandina berries, and basically just had cyanide poisoning, and that's what ended up killing them. And goes back to the cedar waxwings they didn't evolve with this nandina, so they didn't know to stay away and not eat the berries. So So that's just kind of just one example of how it really can affect and end up actually killing native wildlife and especially birds. And then fig buttercup or Ficaria verna. This is one probably within the last 10 to 15 years, it's really starting to become an issue in North Carolina. As you can see from the picture, it's got this nice showy yellow flower. So it's introduced as an ornamental. And it's really good ground cover. And it flowers, it's coming up pretty soon. So usually flowers in March to April. And then after flowering, the foliage, everything basically dies back by the early summer. And then the plants are dormant and they're not going to show back up until, the following March. So it's really important if you're trying to manage fig buttercup to get out there when it's actively growing and, get the herbicide on there. So that it, that you're actually, killing, getting rid of the plant. It's got bulbets with above ground tubers and then underground tubers. And those are the primary method of propagation. So I wanted to spend just a little bit of time going into a little bit more detail on this one. So basically, kind of how to identify it. Basically you look at the location, you're most likely going to be somewhere near a stream or a floodplain forest. It likes to have, wet ground. The leaves are dark green, hairless, and they're heart-shaped. The stalks are smooth and hairless. The flowers, you see over here, really bright yellow. And they sometimes will have a slightly dark center. And then it basically grows low to the ground, maybe just a few inches off. And then a large infestation can appear like a green carpet with yellow dots all over the floor, because similar to that previous picture on the previous slide. So some of our native lookalikes, green and gold, it has just 5 petals and the stalk has hairs. Dwarf cinquefoil also just has 5 flower petals, jagged edges on the leaflets. Yellow stargrass, 6 petals, and the leaves are really tall and more upright like a grass, more so than fig buttercup. And then the wood sorrels, 5 petals again, and then the leaves are divided into 3 like a shamrock. Kind of like a clover. So the reason I wanted to spend just a little bit more time on that one was we actually are right now we have basically a fig buttercup. I don't want to call it eradication project, but we're basically working with local landowners around in the Triangle area to address infestations on their land. And then we want to kind of using iNaturalist for the public to go out and take pictures and say, this is where we found it. And then we also have a GIS map of all the known sightings. So basically taking all that iNaturalist data that we're getting. And also going out and doing actually a little bit of chemical control as well. And in areas where we get permission from the landowner and then we've also, the last 2 years, we bought an ad in the Triangle Gardener. We usually put it out. There's one out there now, and we'll do the next issue as well. So like I said, it's a short window to actually be able to find it and then also be able to control it. So we usually try to get out in the January think there's a January issue and then a March issue. It's usually the two we get the ads for. And we're hoping, at some point to kind of expand this project out. Like I said, we're focusing mainly on the Triangle area. That's where most of our board members are located. So that's kind of was an easy spot. We're hoping to get down into Charlotte and, the Charlotte area and even the Asheville area, and start basically just doing the same thing that we're doing in the Triangle area. And you can see we got an email set up basically for people they can send in a report if they're not comfortable using iNaturalist or if they have a question. And then just a quick overview of how, how these invasive plants are managed. The best management option really is going to depend on what, kind of what plant you're dealing with, and then how large the infestation is. If it's just 1 or 2 plants, you can probably go in there and just do, some hand pulling or, dig it out, basically make sure you get all the roots and, rhizomes or tubers, whatever, whatever propagative things that the plant has. But if you're talking about, a large infestation, it's probably going to have to be, it's not going to be just you going out there one day and pulling it up. It's going to take, multiple years to actually start chipping away at it, and before you can actually remove it from a site. So there's the chemical control. These are just kind of some of the main ways. The cut stumps, you basically go in there and with a little handsaw or a chainsaw, you cut the stump, and then somebody goes behind it and has like basically you just paint the herbicide. You have the concentrated herbicide and you just paint it right on the stump that you just cut. Foliar, you can go out and basically just spray it right on the leaves and kill the plant that way. Or you can do basil bark. We just basically have the oil and a herbicide. You just kind of put it right onto the bark and let it absorb through that way. Mechanical, we go out and cut it, hammer removal, prescribed burning, mowing. Biological, grazing, they do that a lot for kudzu. With goats, they'll kind of fence off an area that has a lot of kudzu and just let the goats go in there and do what they do best. It's actually at Crowder's Mountain State Park. They were doing, I guess, kind of a project there, a little bit of an experiment there just to see how the goats would do. And they were able to remove kudzu from a small portion of the park. And then there's some, and then other targeted biocontrol agents. And really the main thing the best way would be this integrated pest management. So you're going to be using a combination of the management tools. So you're going to go in there and you maybe cut everything down and then let it resprout. And then as it, gets to the right height where you can actually get, do a good herbicide application on it. But yeah, basically it usually is this integrated pest management where it's a combination of either all of the management tools or, just 2 of them, or, any combination of them. So that's all I really have on the terrestrial side. And so now we'll move over to the aquatic side. Like I said, this is, kind of my realm of expertise. And just wanted to give a quick background on the Aquatic Weed program. Basically was set up to provide units of local government and citizens of North Carolina, to help with them with technical assistance, financial assistance, aquatic plant ID. And basically what we're hoping is that by responding to, localized infestations quickly, we're able to mitigate the long-term economic and environmental impact. And then also hoping to reduce the frequency that we're seeing aquatic weed introductions through education and public awareness. So just a quick, just want to give you, kind of how we're funded and the staff that we have. We can pull up to $1 million from the shallow draft, navigation channel, dredging, and aquatic weed fund. And that fund, basically we get like a tenth of 1% of the gas tax, and then we also get a percentage of when people register their boat with the Wildlife Resources Commission. We get that all goes into that fund, and then we're able to pull up to $1 million each year from that fund. And one of the constraints that we have is for each dollar that we spend out of that fund, it has to be matched with a non-state dollar. So we have to have a local cooperator. For instance, we're working right now with the city of Charlotte on a project at Lake Norman. So we basically just, any money that we spend has to be matched, which can make it kind of difficult. But we're doing the best that we can. And then we have 2 permanent staff, 2 full-time employees, myself, and then the program manager. And then we hire 2 seasonal employees to help us out during the summer. And we are a statewide program, so as we're a little bit understaffed as far as how many full-time employees we have. So we utilize contractors, some to help us do some of these herbicide applications, but a majority of the field work is done by us. So how do aquatic invasive plants spread? Similar to terrestrial ones, really, other than, just, has to do a little bit more with water, but basically plant fragments, seeds, flow downstream. Birds, I know I've talked a lot about birds. They're pretty good at moving these plants as well, and even other wildlife, beavers, muskrats, basically anything that would be moving from one water body to the other has the chance to move these plants. And they hitchhike on boats and trailers. You can see that's one of our boats. I think that was out at the Kitty Hawk Bay out on the coast. That's Eurasian water milfoil. It was just, so much of it there in the ramp that we basically, we just had to launch the boat and knew that we were gonna have to clean the trailer off. And then that picture in the bottom right, that's the giant Salvinia site. And the boat ramp is right over here. So as you can imagine, anytime we launch a boat down in there, our trailer and boat are just covered in Salvinia. So we have to be careful about, either getting it all off or letting everything dry out before we move to a different site. Oops. A few problems with aquatic weeds. They divert water flow. The big mats, for instance, alligator weed will break off and they will get clogged up at a culvert or a bridge and back the water up and cause flooding issues. Impeding recreational activities, displacing our native aquatic vegetation. They can clog water intake systems, municipal or hydroelectric, things like that. And then they also can create and expand habitat for mosquitoes and other pests. And like I was mentioned earlier, the Department of Environmental Quality, basically we kind of have our own list. And it's a little bit different than the Department of Ag's. Like Department of Ag doesn't have alligator weed on it's not on their list, but it is on ours because it really causes quite a number of issues, mainly in the eastern part of the state. But there's kind of the most common ones that we deal with. And then that picture in the bottom right, that's Phragmites at Carolina Beach State Park. That was after, it's a few years ago, but basically all that brown that's down on the ground, we were out with park staff. We basically just had these brush cutters, like a big weed whacker with like a saw blade on the end of it. And that was that was what we did all of one day, was just basically go out and cut all that dead growth, so that we would we could actually walk around in there and move and get the herbicide where we needed to. So the first step to managing aquatic vegetation is to be able to correctly identify the plants. And we can certainly help with that. If you want to take a picture, if you see something and you're not sure what it is, you can take a picture and send that along to us. We'll be more than happy to try to help you identify it. The four main ways are biological, chemical, and then physical and mechanical. So we'll go through those really quick. There's biological control. This is mainly done with triploid grass carp. They're mainly used for hydrilla control, and they can be used for other submerged aquatic vegetation. But they're sterile, so they're not able to reproduce because they are another non-native species from Asia. You have to have a permit from Wildlife Resources to be able to stock those fish, and it can be difficult because they don't eat just hydrilla. They like any sort of soft vegetation, so it can be kind of hard to find the right number of fish. And they don't provide they don't really provide any management for our emergent vegetation, and they can be pricey. As you see, $10 to $15 per fish. Moving on to physical, mechanical, this really is the most targeted form. Go out on your dock and have like a weed rake, like in the upper part, and basically just go out there and start pulling the plants up. And then some of the physical ones, you can do water level manipulation, go out there and with the excavator and start digging out and making those near shore areas a little bit deeper. On small pond, you can use dyes, which basically kind of just creates a shade barrier. And then you can also have these bottom covers, which basically divers go down there and they put a big, what amounts to basically a tarp, and weight those down, and that kind of smothers any plants. But it also, if you have a lot of mussels or any other things that are also under that tarp, are also going to be killed. So that one we don't really use that one too often. Chemical control, they're pretty good. We have maybe 12 registered with the US EPA that are approved for aquatic use. And it's just going to depend on what plant. If you're targeting something that's growing on top of the water versus something that is, growing in the water, they're going to be a lot faster than grass carp. The grass carp are usually take a couple years before you'll start seeing any control. And then the herbicides can be, as quick as 2 weeks. So we'll go through just some of the common ones. Alligator weed, it's native to South America. It's probably introduced inadvertently in the Florida and the Gulf Coast states, mainly found in the coastal plain in the Piedmont. So you can see it gets this white little clover-like flower, so that's a good way to identify it. Reproduces mainly through fragmentation, and one way, or one thing that makes this plant so difficult is it can actually grow terrestrially. So you you think you got rid of it all out of a pond or a creek or something, but you didn't see that plant that was 5 feet into the woods, and then a few years later you're starting to see alligator weed showing back up. And it's mainly controlled with herbicides, but there are a few. Alligator weed, flea beetle, not really so much used in North Carolina. It gets too cold, and they really need this to have this green vegetative growth year round. They're not really able to overwinter. And then the thrips, those are showing some promising signs, but still kind of early on with those. So the jury, I think, is still out on those. Eurasian water milfoil. This one was an aquarium ornamental. It's mainly found in the coastal plain. You see it gets these, grows these really dense, thick mats and gets this little floral spike that comes up. And this is a picture, we can go out and we run hydroacoustic data. This other picture here, and basically anywhere you see the oranges and greens and reds, that's basically 100% plant cover there. So you can see that polygon, or that black box basically is our treatment area right in front of the boat ramp. So you can see that would cause quite a number of issues. When people are trying to boat through it, it's pretty difficult. Giant salvinia, I've mentioned this one a couple times. Native to South America, was in the horticulture trade, found only in the coastal plain. We only know of one place right now in Columbus County, about a mile from the South Carolina line. It is a floating fern. And the mats, when it's unmanaged, basically it floats around on top of the water, and those mats have been shown to be about 2 feet deep when it's unmanaged. Right now we're using herbicides and then a biocontrol, Salvinia weevil. We're working with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers to determine if they'll survive in North Carolina over the winter. And here's just a few more pictures. I think I already had this one in the upper left in the presentation already, but you can just see how thick it is. And one reason this site is so difficult is there's about 40 acres in the middle of this pond that's just all cypress. And you can't even, it's so thick in there, you can't even really get a kayak through. And then you can see in the bottom right, that's kind of after, I think that was taken earlier in 2022 after we had started management. So you can still see a little bit of salvinia and some alligator weed is out there as well. But, we're making good progress, but it's going to be a few more years before we can, really say we've eradicated it. Hydrilla, this is probably the one we spend our most money and time on. Brought through the aquarium trade because it's super easy to grow. It's found throughout North Carolina. We have a project in at Lake Waccamaw where we had hydrilla, and then we also have a project goes all the way out to Graham County, Lake Santitla. So basically anywhere, any reservoir in the state is fair game for hydrilla. That's one where it, grows really thick and can, impede recreation. You can't really boat through it. And it kind of tops out late summer. So that's really when we get most of our calls about this plant. And here's just a few pictures. This one in the upper left, that was taken in Oxford, a small lake in Oxford. And there's one down in near Lumberton, and then there's just kind of a close-up of the plant. And then this picture over here, these are tubers, and that's basically, so all this green stuff in North Carolina will die back in the winter, and it persists basically with these tubers, and these tubers can last in the soil for 7 years. So with hydrilla, it's really a 10-year. Once you get hydrilla and you start managing it, you really have to be committed for, probably about 10 years, before you can say that, you've gotten rid of it. Parrot feather, not one that we see too often. A lot of times it's growing in with alligator weed. There is one, Lookout Shoals Lake has quite a bit of it, and we're working with Duke Energy to address that there. It gets these green floral spikes coming up out of the water. Can grow in a variety of habitats, and it's pretty easy to spot. It's got kind of a grayish green color. It just looks really different than anything else. And it's found pretty much throughout North Carolina. Phragmites, this is another one that we deal with quite often out on the coast. Can grow up to like 12 feet tall. And it can't really tolerate prolonged flooding, but it does like to kind of have its feet wet. And so we deal with it a lot, like I said, mainly on the coast and our state parks. It's kind of where we're dealing with it mostly. And we just go out there and we have to use herbicide. And we have seen that once we start removing Phragmites, we really do see a quick turnaround with our native salt marsh species. Really come in within like a year or two of us removing Phragmites from a site. We're already seeing native plants coming back up. And then one more, not so much of a problem, but I think as our climate continues to get warmer, we're probably going to start seeing this one more. This one is water hyacinth. As you can see that bottom picture, it's got a nice purple flower, so it's very popular in the water garden trade. We find it from time to time out in the wild, so to speak, but it has a hard time overwintering in North Carolina. But as I said, it will, as we continue to get warmer, I think it'll probably become more of an issue for us. So that's all I have for the aquatic. So basically, just want to kind of to end on what can you do? You can join the North Carolina Invasive Plant Council or any other organization that deals with invasive plants. And it could be just as simple as taking an interest in invasive plant issues, and then learning to identify them is a key, and then especially ones that are in North Carolina yet, and you can act as an early detector to let us and the Department of Ag know if you see something. Participate in local conservation groups and volunteer. Coordinated invasive plant activities. Find out what's growing in your yard and go out there. If it's invasive, go out there and remove it. And then select native or non-invasive plant alternatives for your landscaping. And then I have a hyperlink down here. The North Carolina Native Plant Society has a really good website on on native plants that you can use. Like I said, there's plenty of resources out there to help you decide what plants to plant. Here's just a few more sites. The North Carolina Botanical Garden has a lot of good information. And then also NC State, has a landscaping for wildlife with native plants. There's just so much information out there. And they even have, here's just a few more, just a snippet of their website. Here is some additional information, and I can share this presentation as well. So you guys can click on all these hyperlinks. And with that, I will quit talking and take any questions.
Thanks, Drew. That was a lot of information for everyone to digest, that's for sure.
Yeah, it's that's what I was trying to kind of get through it there at the end.
No, it's very good. Matter of fact, you're trying to give a lot of information in a short period of time. So just a little bit more than an hour. So thanks for everybody for sticking around with us, who's still on the Zoom call and of course here. I've got a couple of questions. One thing that I thought I'd go ahead and mention again is that a lot of these are, well, all the ones that Drew showed, other than the water hyacinths, for the most part, are real big problems. And economically, I mean, it's amazing to think that you have to deal with hydrilla for 10 years to say that you're done with it. But a lot of the global warming issues and climate change is that as it gets warmer, so many more plants, both terrestrial as well as aquatic, can become more invasive, because so many of them just can't survive the winter. But as we get warmer winters, today being a 70-degree, beginning of February. Anyway, all right, so we've got a couple folks that are saying that they're happy to see their plant nursery people on the council. What has been the extent of the industry's role in the history of the invasive plant problem? And I think you've mentioned pretty much every single plant has more or less been brought in by the, it's pretty, nothing eats it. That's another issue, of course, with it. And so deer resistant has been always, everybody, what can I plant that the deer don't decimate, right?
Right. So yeah, I mean, like you said, they kind of have been the vector really for bringing all these, plants over here. There are a lot more native plant nurseries popping up, throughout the state. So I think they're, maybe they're kind of realizing that they can't really be selling these plants. But as I guess they don't really, they don't really have much of a role on, other than, the person who's on the council is Mellow Marsh Farm. That's the nursery that she's at. But they really don't have much of a role in, managing or anything like that.
Right. The big issue is that if people buy it, there'll be people that sell it. So the more information that you can teach your neighbors about Nandina and Privet and all the rest of it, which of course are still available in all the big box stores. Matter of fact, recently I sent Drew an article of Virginia is moving forward with a bill that's going to have a large invasive plant regulation where they can't sell them, they can't propagate them, they can't move them around the state. So that's a great one from regulating the industry, but North Carolina is not really in a mode in Raleigh to go ahead and regulate. So as consumers, the money talks. Nurseries aren't going to want to sell something that they can't sell, or they're not going to propagate things that they can't sell. So be a squeaky wheel, folks. I can tell you that certainly does work. In fact, if you guys have any questions over here, feel free to launch them at me. I'm going to read the ones that we have here. Yeah, Gretchen. Yeah, great question. So Gretchen's asking about, like, for instance, Nandina in particular, if you're going to cut it and remove it and it's full of the berries. In fact, Erica is kind of talking a little bit about Chinese privet in the same way. And so those berries are, particularly in privet, Nandina a little bit less as far as how well they sprout. but I would cut them and I put them in the trash. I wouldn't put them because the county and, wherever you guys are online, where you live, the county here, Mecklenburg, will go ahead and turn that into compost. And if it doesn't cook enough, it won't denature those seeds.
Right.
So then that compost will still have, weed seeds in it. And I would definitely not just cut them and leave them on your property, because raccoons will come and eat them, whatever else will come. So the important thing is, if you can't get to actually cutting the whole plant down, cutting the berries, putting them in a bag and putting them in a trash, just like, any other sort of like hazardous waste to some degree, is what I would deal with. And definitely the rest of it, the stalks can go in the curbside pickup and that kind of thing. Erica was asking the same thing about Chinese privet. If I can't cut and treat it with herbicide, can I remove the berries? Is there a time of year that I should or should not remove berries? You should remove the berries all the time.
Yes. Yeah. Anytime you see the berries, go out there and get them off of there.
So that's kind of a good compromise. If you can't get your neighbor because they love their ligustrum, because they do bloom, they're actually fairly, they're a great evergreen. I mourned when I found out the ligustrum were as invasive as they are. But, they do provide, some nectar to early pollinators. So a good compromise would be then go and trim it after it blooms, after the pollinators get it. You still have your green fence, but the berries are what are going to be problematic. So get rid of all the berries. Brian asks, what does it take to get a plant on the noxious weed list and eliminate their sale? Just saw that Ohio banned Calorie, the Bradford pear. Pains me to see English ivy, Persian silk, which is mimosa, etc., still sold in Lowe's, Walmart, the Home Depots, all of those. So yeah, Brian, we feel the same pain as you do. Make yourself a noisy cricket. Get out there and talk to the folks that are running those nurseries at the, but they sell stuff because people buy it. People still buy English ivy, which is insane. I pull, thousands of pounds of English ivy out of properties every year. And so many gardeners, still suffer with it. And it's brutal, but I'd still much rather have English ivy as what I'm trying to combat than like wisteria and some other stuff. So, yeah. What's it take to get on that list? Drew, do you know if there's a...
It's not easy, especially if it's a plant that is selling well in the nursery trade. It basically would have to go through a review with the Department of Ag to get listed. And we've tried with the Bradford pear as the Invasive Plant Council, and it's probably not going to happen anytime soon, because one reason being that the Department of Ag, if they list a plant, then they're obligated to then go out and start managing that plant in the landscape. And we're probably the cat's out of the bag with Bradford pear as far as removing it from the state. So that's kind of what they're falling back on, but also because it is still sold, it is still a good, I assume it's still selling well in the nursery trade.
It's unfortunate. I mean, there are a lot of stuff. You go to these big box stores in particular where you don't have horticulturalists that run it. They just bring a whole bunch of things and people are buying them. Stephen says in Mecklenburg County, little or no resources to provide control invasives in the county parks and other controlled lands that the government got. Do you foresee a day, hopefully soon, where this will become a priority? Our green spaces are being overrun with invasive with no end in sight. I can tell you, Stephen, that here at our group and many other groups, there's a lot of invasive plant cleanups. Matter of fact, we're going to have one April the 6th with I can't remember the name of the group that is putting that together, but it's all about controlling invasives. And even in a small park like Squirrel Lake Park, we've been battling with wisteria, kudzu, and a number of other plants for many, many years. So it just basically takes folks to get out there and volunteer like us, but then also pressuring your elected officials to let them know that you find this, unacceptable. Again, that's the noisy cricket that you need to become. What ecological side effects do introduced grass carp cause, Drew?
Well, they eat they eat all of our, they eat just more than just hydrilla. So they, will eat the native vegetation that we want to have out there. As far as any other, they're strictly herbivores, so they're not going to be eating other fish or fish larvae or eggs or anything like that. So like sport fishery wise, they're, not going to have any impact on them. They're not going to be like the common carp that are really, because their mouth is terminal. The grass carp is, so they're feeding in the water column, whereas the common carp, they're subterminal, so their mouth is pointing down and they're mucking around in the bottom looking for macroinvertebrates and and other things. So as far as any sort of water clarity issues or turbidity issues, the carp introduced, the sterile grass carp are not going to cause any of those issues.
One thing that I've heard is that our plants in Asia cause arguably the same kind of problems because they hadn't evolved with their pest control. And their plants here, well, same thing with the fish, right? So the Asian carp is a big aquatic problem. That's why what he was talking about were sterile fish. That's very pricey. I can only imagine how expensive it would be to actually be effective. But our largemouth bass cause all sorts of problems in Asia. Our squirrels cause all sorts of problems in Europe.
Right.
So, all of these, these introduced species, whether they be an insect, whether they be, a fungus, whether they be all the, mammals and whatnot, cause problems where the evolution hadn't happened. We're trying to make it happen in a couple of decades where, the pest has evolved with it over millennia. But
right.
There was something, Brian did go ahead and comment that he does squeak whenever he can. So thank you for that, Brian. There was something else in here that one of the other questions, we can't get to all of them because it's already like 8:30 and some of us have to get to bed. But Terry had asked about, thanks for the hard work. I've tried to find who to talk to about removing ivy along the MTS, which is, I assume is the Mountain to Sea Trail. Near the Blue Ridge Parkway. I got the total runaround and finally gave up. I was willing to get out there and help remove it, but being on federal land was the big issue. You have any suggestions who I can talk to about this sort of situation?
Yeah, there's one of our board members works with Mountain True in Asheville, and I think they've done some work on the Mountains of Sea Trail. His name is Bob Gale. And let me see.
Hey, can you also show that last slide that had a bunch of resources on it? There was
this one.
I believe this is the one that you were asking for, right, Rebecca, with more info about invasive species. One more time. Yeah, I tell you what, we're going to also go ahead and post this to our website, hawk ncwf.org, and we'll also put it on our Facebook page. One thing that Drew didn't mention, it was kind of funny, I was chuckling as he was talking about all these. The only link that he didn't include out of like the 50 that he had in here was the National Wildlife Federation.
I should have done that one. You're right.
That's all right. These are all fabulous. We're big fans of the Native Plant Society. We're big fans of NC State. They have real good sources. The National Wildlife Federation also has great, what plants to plant, where you are, wherever you are in the country, as well as how many moth and Lepidoptera species they host. So, but start anywhere, really. All of this is fantastic. Drew, were you going to talk about, because you were going to say his name, his contact info would be over at the NC Invasive Plant Council homepage, right?
Yeah, and I just answered that question in the chat too. And I put his
Okay,
name
great.
and his email.
Excellent. So feel free to reach out to us if you have any more questions. You know, join us on our Facebook. We have a Facebook page, and then there's also the Facebook group. So feel free. There's no berries if there aren't going to be flowers. You get a couple of thank yous in here, some thanks, and it looks like our internet connection is becoming unstable. So it's like the perfect time to say goodnight to everybody. Thanks so much for sticking around with us, and we look forward to seeing you again real soon. Come join us. We'll see you. Thanks so much, Drew. Appreciate your time.
Yeah, thanks everybody.
Appreciate it. Bye, guys.